Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Project Management Success, Tools and Templates to Drive Performance. My name is Katie Bull, and I'm the Business Development Associate here at Elire. And I just want to start with just a couple reminders before the webinar today. All attendees are placed on mute for the duration. If you guys have any questions, please submit them through the question portal at the bottom of your screen or the chat to panelists at the bottom of your screen as well. We're going to have 2 polls today that require your participation. Answering these polls just really help us cater our webinars for the future and just give us a little bit more idea about you guys. And also a recording of the webcast is going to be sent out in the next couple of days. And we can also send out a copy of the presentation upon request. Any of our past webinars and a recording of today's webinar will be found on elireinc.com as well as on the Elire YouTube channel. With that, I'm going to pass it over to our presenter, Richard Merrill.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the attendees for being with us over the next half hour. So I'm just going to start off with a quick introduction of myself. My name is Richard Merrill. I'm a partner with Elire. I have 25 years of project management experience, leading strategy, process improvement, and technology implementations. That includes everything from projects that last a few weeks to projects that last a few years, projects that may have a few people working on one thread of work to dozens of people who work on, one time we had 12 different threads of work. So today I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about Elire, but we'll spend the vast majority of the time talking about some project management best practices. We'll tell you a case study where we took a client that was struggling on their project and they were in the red status and we took them to the green status. And we'll give some tips about how to stay in the green status, as well as for all those attendees who are in the audience today, if you desire, you're all eligible for at least one complimentary health check for any of your projects that are currently in flight. So with that, let's start off with just a little bit about who Elire is. So we are celebrating our 15th year. We really pride ourselves on partnering with our clients to help them efficiently implement, integrate, and upgrade those software investments. You know, at the end of the day, we want to give strategic guidance on how to best use technology coupled with business process improvement to really unlock the potential of those investments and to make the processes as effective and efficient as possible. We have a deep commitment to excellence and quality, and our main goal at the end of the day is to really be a trusted advisor, a client that can come back to us over and over again looking for advice. And we think one of the reasons we've been able to do that is we're pretty proud of our track record of overseeing and managing successful projects over these last 15 years. And so what we're sharing today is a lot of learnings from those 15 years, learnings from myself, my own career, as well as learnings from our other very experienced set of project managers and partners who are all at Elire. So going into the first major topic, let's just talk a little bit about project management best practices. We're going to hit 3 different topics here. One is, what are some structure and approach things that you can put into place that we think will make a difference? How can you use a toolkit to make managing projects a little bit easier for you? And then what are some soft skills that are important to project managers and to teams, with some practical tips on what that means in today's world in which we're all working remotely. So starting off with the project management structure and approach, we're big, strong believers in creating a project charter. Project charter is just a 1 to 2 page document. It can be longer, but it doesn't have to be, but a short document that's really designed to gain alignment and consensus. And that's alignment and consensus with all the people working on the projects, as well as all the stakeholders impacted by the project. And by doing that, the document really does that by helping outline the background. What's the problem statement? What are you trying to solve for? What's the overall timeline of the initiative? How long is it going to take? What are those key milestones, perhaps? What's the goal and the scope and the deliverables so that you can ensure everyone knows the direction that you're marching to? And then who's really involved? Who are the key stakeholders? We have a tool called Elire that we'll show you in a little bit that helps you identify those key stakeholders. And again, it's the stakeholders in which you're using this tool to try to gain alignment. And then keeping track of the overall budget. What is that budget for the initiative? And so putting together this document, we really recommend the project manager lead that effort, working with the project sponsor, maybe some potential key stakeholders, and really in a set of brainstorming sessions can come up with this information and really be used to get the project off the ground and to get that alignment that we think is so critical, and that can be used to strengthen the foundation of the project from the very beginning. But going further than that, some other things you can do around structure and approach is really having some defined project meeting cadences. Now, we realize this is sort of common knowledge, but sadly, it's not always common practice. Some projects just don't have updates as regularly as they should. I myself am a Agile certified Scrum Master. So on Agile projects, we're used to a very regimented meeting cadence, right? Sometimes projects that are hybrids or perhaps waterfall approaches may not fall into this as cleanly as they like. So we really recommend starting off with a good kickoff meeting to ensure all the resources understand their roles and responsibilities, reviewing all the deliverables, timelines, and methodologies, and not just doing that at the beginning of the project and then never thinking about it again, but doing it at the start of each major phase, whether that might be design or build or test. What are the goals of that phase? What's the approach? What are the tools that you're using? What are the timeline? What are the expectations of that phase? And so those kickoff meetings can really help add value and alignment throughout the project. So the alignment you got at the beginning with the charter can really be maintained through the course of the project. And then thinking about weekly status meetings with the core project team, identifying key risks and open issues, and making sure everyone is hitting their milestones and understanding what those barriers are. But then also having a steering committee, key executives who are in place, the project sponsor as perhaps other peers, to really look at what's the status of the project and to provide some guidance and maybe help clear some roadblocks as it relates to issues and risks. And we find, and we'll be telling you a little bit more about this in a minute, but we find these weekly meetings and steering committee meetings just go a lot better if you have a status report and a standard status report. Rather than creating it from scratch every time, use a standard template that covers everything you need to know from timeline, resources, scope, budget, etc. And of course, it might also include a RAID log, which is your risks and action items and issues and decision points, right? And we'll show you sort of an example of that in just a minute. But another best practice is having a toolkit. And we recommend every organization out there really create and utilize their own set of project management tools that could be tailored to you as an organization using your own terminology, your own formats, your own tools, and then provide training to your project managers on how to use those tools. So what would be in that toolkit? So we think there are certain things that need to be done before a project even kicks off. And one of those is the charter to help get the project off the ground, get it aligned, build a strong foundation. But there may also be onboarding checklists. If you're bringing consultants like myself on, what are all the hurdles that you have to jump through to get security clearances and get access to networks and laptops deployed? All those standard sets of documentation you're always looking for, like policies and procedures. And in those early days of the project, there are some standard tools that we recommend you develop around mobilization, a standard project plan format, a standard RACI tool, which we'll show you more about in a minute. And then if you're scheduling a lot of workshops, like design workshops or testing workshops, demos even, and it requires a lot of people and a lot of their time putting together a workshop schedule. So that as you're then moving into execution and delivering on everything that's in the project plan, there's some other tools that can keep you on track. Having established meeting agendas with a tool called a Grippy, taking meeting minutes, doing a regular status report, and even conducting health checks. So that after the project is done, the toolkit can then continue to support you with lessons learned and maybe an offboarding checklist. So rather than just tell you about having a toolkit and the importance of a toolkit, part of this deck is, practical pieces of advice. And so we showed you a little bit what a charter looks like. We want to talk to you about RACI and status reports next. And then at the end, we'll be talking a little bit about a health check. So again, recommending you not only create a toolkit, but giving you some samples that you might be able to work with. So RACI, that's a tool I keep mentioning. It's a stakeholder alignment tool. It defines ownership of process activities and helps determine who should be involved in each phase. Obviously, it's an acronym. It stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And it's designed to help you figure out who are the doers, who are the hands to keyboard people who get the work done. Maybe an AP clerk, and a staff accountant, a payroll clerk, and then who's really accountable and oversees that, whether it's the payroll manager, the accounting manager, what have you. And then who are upstream and downstream, so that as they're entering vouchers, entering journals, creating payroll, who's impacted by that, upstream or downstream. And then who are the folks who are not really involved, but maybe just need to be informed that payroll was run successfully, or that the books were closed for the month. And so the tool can be built in any spreadsheet tool. We've used Google Sheet, we've used Smartsheet, we've also used basically Excel. And as you can see, it's just building out who are those names and some identifying information, and then identifying them by process. Here we just gave some very high level processes of GL and AP, and you then simply line up who's the key stakeholder. In this example, we use superheroes. Diana Prince is responsible, so she's hands to keyboard on GL. Clark Kent's overall accountable, and Peter Parker's consultant. So all three of them you'd want to invite them to a meeting to talk about GL. Lois Lane would not be invited. She's not involved in that process. You can then look over at AP and have the same thing, right? Like in that example, you would invite Lois and Peter, but not the other folks, because they're just informed or not involved at all. So having that simple tool goes a long way in making sure you know who your key stakeholders are. Another tool, though, we talked about on that toolkit is a status report. And again, we build these in Google Sheet. We also build them in Smartsheet as well as Excel. And they're down the right-hand side here, they're designed to show overall status. Where are you at? From a sort of a stoplight perspective. And then how are you doing on those key items like budget, resources, timeline, and scope? And then underneath that, what are your key milestones and what's your status on them? Below that, cut off by the screen, is the RAID log. What are your list of issues, your action items? What are your issues? And what are your decision items? And so this report we produce these weekly for all of our in-flight projects, and review them in those weekly status meetings we talked about earlier. So those are just two examples of a toolkit, of items in the toolkit that we strongly recommend you develop for your own projects. And then continuing with the last topic of best practices, we just want to focus a little bit on soft skills, which are defined at the bottom there, but I think we all know what soft skills are. And one of the key ones is communication, making sure everyone is aligned on the messaging, everyone knows what's going on, everyone understands the status, that messaging is tailored to the different levels of the folks involved on the project team, and it's being received by everyone who's involved in the RACI. And really leveraging the tools such as Slack and Microsoft Teams, which are two great tools very similar to each other that let you create team spaces for sharing full ideas, assigning tasks, all of that. And then of course, using tools like I just said around status reports and a regular meeting structure in which those messages can be shared. Another soft skill to focus on is connection. Teams are by definition collaborative. They need to be working together to accomplish a task. it can be extra difficult to collaborate in this world we've been living in these many months. And we've all gotten used to doing things over Zoom. But what can we do to further encourage that connection and alignment? The more team members like each other, the more they get along with each other, the more they know their strengths and weaknesses, the more connection they have, the better they'll operate as a team. So encouraging one-on-ones, social hours, and leveraging messaging and chat tools via Slack and Microsoft Teams can go a long way in ensuring that teams are actually connecting and not working as a number of individual resources. And all projects have changed. And so what can we do to encourage adaptability and help people get through the change? So when a change occurs, address it head on. Hold a meeting with those folks on the RACI, with those stakeholders. Let them know in that meeting what you know as the PM, what you don't know. If you don't know, how are you going to get answers? And when are you going to connect with them next to give them those answers? So answering those basic questions about what you know, don't know, how you're getting answers, and when they'll hear from you next can really help ease people through that change. And the final soft skill is around time management. Obviously we all struggle with being on the screen all day long. And even in the days before that, we struggled with running from meeting to meeting and always showing up just a few minutes late because you had to change floors and wait for the elevator. So we strongly recommend changing your default meeting settings in Outlook, in Google Calendar, whatever tool you use. There are default settings that are very easily changed so that meetings can be scheduled for 50-minute increments instead of 60-minute increments. It then creates natural gaps that allow people to prep for the next meeting, or when we're all back in the office again, allows you time, to actually get to the next conference room.
Thank you, Richard. So we're at our first poll question. And the first poll question is going to be, does your organization currently have a project management office or a project manager structure in place? I'll give you a couple seconds to answer here. And I'm going to close it out. So Richard, it looks like we had a mix between people only using an in-house project manager and also using internal and external project management.
Okay, great. Thank you, Katie. And going back to that toolkit, with in-house project managers, every time you start a project, you mobilize a project, you're executing on a project, how many times have people just created their own status report, created their own meeting minute template, created their own agenda tool, and they're all having to do it from scratch every single time? So having that toolkit built and giving people advice on a regular meeting structure can go a long way to help support those internal project management resources. We all know that we're being asked to do more with less. More work is being done with fewer people, and especially in this time of recession. And so making it easier for people to leverage tools rather than build from scratch is a really important lesson. It's also important when you're bringing in outside consultants, right? Because you would like those outside managed projects to look just like your inside managed projects. And when you're talking to an executive on meeting status, wouldn't it be great if all those templates were the same? So thanks for that feedback in the poll question. Moving on for our case study, going from red to green. So just a little bit of a background. Elire, this is a very recent case study from 2020. We had a higher education client who had purchased the PageUp system. If you've not heard of PageUp, it's basically a set of HR tools that includes such things as recruiting, learning management system, that's what LMS is, a learning management system, or onboarding employees. When they purchased the module and the licenses, they paid upfront for the implementation. So basically they purchased something, but didn't, and paid upfront, but didn't really have any project manager hours, unfortunately, included in that to help them implement it. And then didn't really have a whole robust set of hours for functional and technical to actually get the tool done. So they were effectively paying for it to sit on the shelf. And we probably have heard that from lots of instances, right? And so what they really needed was a PM who was experienced running a technology implementation, certainly, but also someone who had experience with these tools and could help build business requirements and get them through design, get them through testing, get them through training, help them actually utilize the software that they were already paying for. You know, we were able to successfully deliver. We stepped in and created a very detailed, well-organized project plan, which is something, you know, they did not have. And we created a meeting structure and a set of, meeting tools to run the project, getting into those cadences of regular checkpoints, weekly and monthly checkpoints, doing check-ins on people who had tasks assigned to them, making sure that if you had a task assigned to you, that you knew how to complete the task. All that blocking and tackling that a PM is supposed to do, but we also brought to the table a strong point of view on how it should be implemented and what the requirements should be and how we should potentially design it, test it, and train it. Again, all skills that that client was looking for. We were able to really turn that project around. Those modules are now successfully implemented, I'm proud to say. And we got some kudos from the director of HRS, letting them know that they really enjoyed working with our PM, who was professional, excellent at bringing different groups of people together, you know, breaking down those walls between IT and the business, for instance, and getting the project moving. And we're just thankful that it was the right person for the right job at the right time. Someone who was not only a good PM, but understood the underlying technology. Now, in terms of going from red to green, often what is wrong is, you know, there's something wrong with scope or budget or timeline or resources, right? So what are some things to do to go from red to green? Or if you're currently green and want to stay there. So we've all heard of scope creep, and it's important to acknowledge scope creep and then to deprioritize items to later phases rather than continue to push everything in. What can really be done now versus later? And as part of that, what's the cost benefit of deprioritizing something and leveraging on the steering committee to make sure that they're on board with that and understand it and can help champion you. In terms of resources, we often find that everyone comes to work, everyone wants to do a good job. No one, or at least very few people, show up not wanting to do a job. But there are barriers to doing your job. You don't have enough time, or maybe you don't have the right skills. So making sure people have the right training, showing them up with those skills if they need it, and then making sure that you're balancing the workloads goes a long way. In addition to that, looking at and managing the timeline, you know, making sure you really understand all your dependencies and your critical path items, including all of those things that you have to deal with third parties. I myself have been on a lot of projects where you have to rely on outside suppliers or vendors, such as banks, and you don't want to wait to contact them into the last minute. You want to understand when you need them, how you need them, and who that point of contact is going to be. And then finally, budget. Again, budget is another reason projects can slip to red. So whether it's working with external consultants like myself, who you want to make sure are, you know, actually doing the work on time according to their milestones, or potentially as part of that scoping conversation, saying what could be delayed until future phases. So again, I think a lot of these are very practical tips that could be done to help move a project from red to green or stay in that green status.
Thanks, Richard. We're going to go ahead with our last poll question. So we would like just a little bit more understanding on what roadblocks your organization's projects are often hitting that's preventing them from success. This could be scope creep, as Richard's talked about, missed timeline, too few or not the right resources, budget issues, or all of the above. I'll give a couple seconds to answer. So it looks like, Richard, we're having a mix between scope creep and too few or not the right resources.
And thank you for that. And so again, I remember some of those can go hand in hand. If you're struggling to finish the work you already have, then continuing to add scope is just going to make a bad problem worse, right? So really going back, understanding what's the true benefit of adding that scope versus the cost, and then leveraging the steering committee and having those open and honest discussions, I think is really important. In terms of too few resources, if that's truly the case, there's just not enough people to do the work, what could potentially be deprioritized from scope so that you could at least deliver 80% of what you wanted to in a really good way, rather than 100% of what you wanted to in a not so good way. So moving on from that, let's talk about everyone who's participating in the webinar today is eligible, if they desire, for a complimentary health check on your projects that might be dealing with scope creep or resource issues. And so what Elire would do, our team of trained project management professionals would review your project structure, review your tools, review your resources, and make sure everyone's aligned. We would identify risks regarding those 4 items we just got done talking about, and then make some very specific recommendations to mitigate those risks and going from red to green. This could all be accomplished in a workshop in which what we would do is take you through this is just a small snapshot of it. We would take you through a series of questions, finding out about the project, what structure you have in place, what tools you're using, what's going on in those 4 areas. And coming out of that workshop, our professionals would then score that project, look for areas of risk, and then provide to you a summary report pointing out the greatest areas of risk and some specific mitigation activities you could take in order to move that project from red to green. So again, everyone who's participating in the health check today is eligible, everyone who's participating in the webinar today is eligible for that free complimentary health check from Elire.
Thank you, Richard. So it looks like we had 2 questions come through that I want to make sure we get answered. So the first one is, I have an in-flight project and the project manager needs to be replaced for various reasons. However, I'm afraid that's going to cause more turmoil. What are the best practices for replacing a project manager mid-project?
And that's a great question and a common issue we often see. And what we find is the best practice is to really rip that Band-Aid off. If you don't have the right PM and the project's going sideways or is already off the rails because of it, then continuing to keep that person there is probably not the answer. What we really recommend is finding another PM who has those not only good blocking and tackling skills, but maybe understands the underlying project itself. And in an ideal world, you would bring that new person on as maybe a coordinator or a shadow resource for a week or 2, and then flip out the PMs. And be very open and public about it. Pull together a meeting like we talked about, where you're talking about you're making the change. This is what we know, what we don't know, how we're getting answers for you. And treat it as an open and honest transition so that you can then move on and focus on everything else that needs to get done. That's a great question.
Thanks, Richard. The last question is, I'm starting a new IT project. Does my project manager only need to have PM skills, or should they also know the technology?
That's also a really good question. And I myself was a PM many years ago. In my early 20s, I was asked to lead a project that I didn't know anything about the underlying technology. I thought I did a pretty good job on blocking and tackling, but I know I didn't do as good a job as I could have, and not nearly as good a job as I do now, because I do understand the underlying technology. So the short answer is, it's better to have both. Someone who not only knows how to run a project, but understands the underlying requirements, underlying processes, underlying needs, and can ask the tough questions if necessary of those functional and technical consultants actually doing the work.
Thank you, Richard. That's all the questions we had. So I think we'll just wrap it up here. Coming up, we have some upcoming additional webinars that are going to be happening in November. The first one is going to be on AP automation for PeopleSoft. That's going to be presented with Canon, also cloud reporting, and as well as Kyriba connectivity as a service. So feel free to visit elire.com/webinars for additional information on all of those. And as always, engage with Elire on social media. We're posting, multiple blog posts and webinars and things like that. So we would love for you to engage in our content. And just another reminder, a recording of the presentation will be sent out later this week. And if you guys have any additional questions, feel free to contact sales@elire.com, or you can email jordanfuger@elire.com as well. But thank you so much again for attending, and have a great rest of your day.